This story was taking place when I was 12 years old when I went to visit my grandparents in Japan. I'm 18 now. It was a hot summer day, and I was exploring the city of Kyoto with my friends. We had just finished visiting a famous temple and were walking towards a nearby park when we stumbled upon an old, run-down antique shop. The sign outside read, "Nakamura Antiques," and the windows were filled with strange artifacts from Japan's past. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to go inside. As soon as we stepped through the door, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was thick with the smell of incense, and the dim lighting added to the eerie atmosphere. The shop was filled with all sorts of oddities, from samurai swords to vintage kimonos. But there was one item that caught my eye, a small wooden box with intricate carvings on the lid. The shopkeeper, an old man with a wrinkled face, noticed my interest and told me that the box was a rare artifact from the Edo period. I couldn't resist the temptation, and I decided to buy the box. As I handed over the cash, the old man warned me to be careful with it and to never open it under any circumstances. Later that night, as I was getting ready for bed, I placed the box on my bedside table. I couldn't resist the urge to peek inside, so I slowly opened the lid. But as soon as I did, I felt a wave of negative energy wash over me. The room grew colder, and I heard strange whispers in my ear. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud coming from outside my room. I cautiously opened the door, but there was no one there. As I turned to go back to bed, I saw a dark figure standing in the corner of my room. It was hazy and indistinct, but I could sense its malevolent intentions. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. I closed my eyes and focused on sending positive energy towards the figure, hoping to drive it away. After what felt like an eternity, the figure dissipated, and the room returned to normal. The next morning, I decided to return the box to the antique shop. As I handed it back to the old man, he looked at me knowingly and thanked me for bringing it back. He explained that the box contained a cursed spirit that had been trapped inside for centuries, and that it was not meant to be opened by anyone. As I walked out of the shop, I couldn't help but wonder what other cursed artifacts were out there, waiting to be discovered by unsuspecting buyers. It was the summer of 2022 when I went to visit my grandparents in India. I was excited to see them again, as it had been 5 years since my last visit. I was supposed to go in the summer of 2020 but couldn't due to the COVID pandemic. My grandparents lived in a small village in the state of Tamil Nadu, and the journey there was quite long and tiring. But as soon as I arrived, I forgot all about my fatigue and was swept up in the warmth and love of my grandparents. The village where my grandparents lived was nestled between lush green fields and surrounded by dense forests. The air was thick with the scent of spices and the sound of cicadas filled the air. I spent most of my days playing with the other children in the village, exploring the forests, and helping my grandparents tend to their small farm. One day, while wandering through the forest, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned temple. It was overgrown with vines and covered in moss, but I could still make out the intricate carvings on the walls. As I approached the temple, I noticed that the air around me grew colder and the cicadas stopped chirping. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside. The inside of the temple was dark and musty, and I could barely make out the outlines of statues and carvings. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering sound coming from somewhere in the temple. I looked around, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder and more urgent, and I began to feel a sense of dread in the pit of my stomach. I turned to leave, but the door had shut behind me, trapping me inside. The whispering grew louder and more menacing, and I could hear something moving in the shadows. Suddenly, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared in front of me, and I froze in terror. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the whispering stopped, and the red eyes disappeared. The door creaked open, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. I ran all the way back to my grandparents' house, where I collapsed on the ground, shaking with fear. When I finally managed to calm down, I told my grandparents what had happened. They listened patiently, and then my grandmother told me a story about the temple. She said that it was dedicated to a powerful goddess who protected the village from evil spirits and dark magic. But over time, the temple had been forgotten, and its power had faded. Now, it was said to be haunted by the spirits of those who had once worshipped there. I never went back to the temple again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and mysterious was lurking in the forests around my grandparents' village. Despite the fear I felt, I was also filled with a sense of wonder and awe at the power of the ancient temple and the goddess who had once been worshipped there. My summer in India had been filled with adventure, and I would never forget the mysterious temple that had both terrified and fascinated me. I visited my grandparents overseas during the summer when I was 16 years old. They lived in a small village in rural China that was surrounded by lush green fields and towering mountains. I'm not going to disclose the exact location for privacy's sake. The village was peaceful and serene, and the people were friendly and welcoming. One day, my grandparents decided to take me on a hike through the mountains. They wanted to show me the natural beauty of their homeland and teach me about the history of the area. I was excited to spend time with them and explore the outdoors. We started our hike early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen. The air was cool and crisp, and the birds were just starting to chirp. We walked along a narrow path that wound through the forest, and I marveled at the towering trees and the sound of the babbling brook nearby. As we walked, I noticed that the forest was getting darker and denser. The trees were growing closer together, and the sunlight was struggling to filter through the canopy. I felt a sense of unease creeping up on me, but I tried to push it aside and enjoy the hike. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. I turned to see a small, furry animal darting across the path. It was gone in an instant, but the sound made me jump. My grandparents chuckled and told me not to worry, that the forest was full of animals like that. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we continued on, the feeling of unease grew stronger. I felt like something was watching us from the shadows, like we were intruders in a place we didn't belong. Suddenly, we heard a low growling sound. It was coming from behind us, and it sounded like a wild animal. My grandparents froze, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. We turned around to see a large, black dog standing in the middle of the path. It was staring at us with glowing eyes, and its teeth were bared in a snarl. It looked like it was ready to pounce at any moment. My grandparents tried to back away slowly, but the dog lunged forward. It growled and barked, and we could see the saliva dripping from its mouth. We were trapped, with nowhere to go. Suddenly, a man appeared from the bushes nearby. He was tall and muscular, with a stern expression on his face. He yelled something in Chinese, and the dog backed away from us. The man approached us and spoke to my grandparents in rapid Chinese. They responded in kind, and I could tell that they were trying to explain what had happened. As they spoke, I noticed that the man's eyes kept flicking towards me. It made me feel uncomfortable, like he was trying to read my thoughts or figure out who I was. After a few minutes, the man nodded and turned to leave. The dog followed him, and they disappeared back into the bushes. My grandparents told me that the man was a local farmer who was known to keep a pack of dogs to protect his property. We continued our hike, but the feeling of unease never left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had intruded on something we shouldn't have, that we had crossed some invisible boundary. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that it was something powerful and mysterious. When we finally returned to my grandparents' house, I was exhausted and shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about the man and his dogs, and the way he had looked at me. I didn't know what he wanted, or why he had appeared when he did. But I knew that it was a reminder that there are things in this world that we can't explain or understand. Thank you for watching, and be sure to give the video a like. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already.